Okay, let's start. Right, so welcome to the first seminar of 2023. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much, Cinzia, for agreeing to present. Cinzia Rienzo is going to present a paper which is work in progress, so she really appreciates comments on this, unions and immigrants' wages in the US. If you have any questions, I didn't ask Cinzia, but I think Cinzia, it'll be okay if people interrupt in the middle.
Of course, yes, of course, yeah.
We'll try to kind of have
Let's
the
go.
last 10 minutes or so for questions as well. So please interrupt if you have any question, but if not, then please mute your microphones, and also remember that this is being recorded and will be available on the GLO website. Right, over to you, Cinzia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Very happy to start this the New Year monthly series. So this is a paper of union, immigrants' wages in the United States. So as already pointed out, it's very much work in progress, and more than never comments, suggestions are very welcome. You know, you will realize there is more that I need to do that, you know, would have done. But it would be good to have a sense and reactions and, you know, whatever. So what is the main motivation? The motivation of this paper really connects to two big chunk of the labor economic literature. The first one is the economic performance of immigrants that has been, you know, studied for over 40 years and still is an important topic in labor economics. I take the chance to say that I have a chapter on this, on the labor, human resource and population economics. There has been over 40 years of research, various factors that have been pointed out that can facilitate or constrain the wage performance, the labor market performance in terms of wages of migrants, among others, location choice, the fact that migrants tend to invest more in skills learning. Of course, time spent in the host country is crucial, has been pointed out in many research, and of personal characteristic, particularly level of education, language proficiency, also play an important part. And the other part of the economic literature that this paper is connected is the study of union on wages and wage inequality. Similarly, there have been studied over 40 years. So I'm not summarizing here, you know, the main pieces of research, but clearly, you know, Card, DiNardo, Lemieux, and Forti, among others, Freeman, Bryson, Blanchflowers, just to mention some. They've been studying the role of union on wages and wage inequality, mainly in the UK and the US.
Forse ad averlo saputo che non aveva in mente nessuno, però ci si poteva attivare.
Sorry, someone has got the
non capisca bene subito come quanto vale.
Sorry, someone has got the microphone on. Thank you. And then, as I said, despite this and despite the importance of the unions that has been covered, this aspect, as far as I know, particularly for the US, has not been considered for immigrants' wages. So this is surprisingly because for various reasons. One, because of course migrants now represent a larger part of the labor force in the US, like in the UK, as in many other countries. But unions really usually try to improve wages, working conditions for the member, for those that they belong to them. But this is particularly important for those who are located in the bottom part of the wage distribution. And as Bryson pointed out, the union affects wage level and wage dispersion in direct and indirect ways. And still nowadays, the studies still show that union has an important effect. So it is in a way surprisingly that this aspect has not really given much attention to the fact, you know, compared to migrants. And again, it's important because migrants could take a form of protection, particularly for those, the minority parts, and for those who work in low-paid jobs and so on. But when we talk about, relation between union, migrants and wages, of course, this also depends on the openness of migrants, on unions towards migrants. And in the US, the relationship between union and minorities, particularly for migrants, has been controversial. In fact, a labor union has always and often considered migrants as competitor for jobs, threatening wages or working conditions of existing workers in the US. And many labor organizations have, in fact, previously supported immigration restrictions. However, this attitude has changed. Partially has changed because, as I will show you later, there has been over time, as well-known, deunionization in the labor market. So this has probably been a way for unions in the US to get more membership. But also, on the other hand, is also there has been a way to recognize that migrants do represent an important part of the labor force. And so, particularly since 2000, most unions have changed their position regarding immigration in the US and have place a lot of emphasis on organization of immigrant workers, so making really clear, spelling out the support and the welcoming of immigrant workers. So this table just shows a couple of important timing. The most important one would be the last one in 2000, when these two different organizations joined, and the main policy of the union, the AFL and CIO, was to welcome immigrants from legal human rights of immigrant workers as a central part of the national program. So this to say that, again, migrants unions have become more open towards migrants. So, as I said, there has been a huge literature, as we all know, for 40 years or even more. But more recently, there has been a resurgence of interest in unions. So there are, I'm just mentioning a couple of papers that are more relevant for what I'm presenting. One is from Addison, Portugal, and Vilares. They use this union membership density. So the approach is slightly different than all the previous literature, when the main information was to use the union membership. They use the density, union membership density at firm level. And they show essentially the role of firm is quite important, not surprisingly. And also the other paper for Farber et others, also published in 2021 on Quarterly Journal of Economics, where they revised the union and inequality using historical data and documenting that there have been a lot of changes. In addition to this, there are two other papers that are relevant to what I do, but these two papers reflect more the current approach of the studies between union and migrants. And the main thing is that when, those who have been studying the relationship between union and migrants have been mainly concerned about what determines the union membership of migrants, what are the elements. So the first paper from Anton and others relates to Austria, where the second one relates to Germany. So what I'm doing in this paper and how my paper tries to contribute in the vast literature. So what I do is to examine this association between union and wage immigrants in the United States for over 25 years. So I'll try to present to show variation of union membership over time, and try to compare systematically immigrants and natives wages, looking at different dimensions, of course, over time, but also try to look at different characteristic of workers. And so the main question is how and if did union affect wage of migrants compared to natives? So did unions affect the same pressure on wages of natives as and to immigrants in the same way or not? And then, of course, it is relevant to see whether if migrants benefit from being unionized, and if they do, what determine the unionization rate of migrants. So this is, pretty much what I'm trying to do, looking at different aspects, different dimensions. So, of course, these questions, as we all know, are quite challenging. For the moment, the analysis is not causal, but I think it's still informative. And, I'll consider this as a starting point, trying to indeed address the causality issue and nod then to the more descriptive analysis for the moment. So the data that I use the current population survey from 1994 to 2019. The data contain information allows to identify migrant, the decades of arrival, as well as various characteristics in terms of demographic, but also of related to the labor market characteristics. In the sample, I focus on men only. Probably later on in the paper, I might look also at women, but as usual, looking at women makes things a bit more complicated, particularly when comparing migrants and natives, because there are some nationalities in immigrants that show the labor force participation of women is actually a bit lower. I focus, of course, of employees, both part-time, full-time, workers aged 21 to 64, with an hourly wage between $1 to $100 and working in the private sector only. Now, there is this paper from Card and others published on the Canadian Journal of Economics, where they focus particularly on the public sector. So it is getting more important. But the reason why I focus on the private sector is because the vast majority of workers, for example, in 2019, only 12% of male workers work in the public sector. And of those working in the public sector, all about 10% of workers are migrants. So this to say that, the largest part of migrants work in the private sector, but also work in the public sector, I think would require additional, that we will have some other requirement for migrants. So it will, complicate maybe the analysis a little bit. Unionized are defined individuals reporting being a member of union, or if they report being represented by a union in the workplace. However, notice that about 90% of those who are defined in this way as unionized are actually member of union. So putting them together, doesn't really create a big issue, because the vast majority are indeed union member. And then, as we know, migrants and natives, they try to work in different sectors, and they are usually, particularly migrants, are usually polarized in low-skilled occupation and in high-skilled occupation. So it is important to look at this dimension. And to define high and low-skilled workers, I follow Borgers and Cassidy in this paper on 2019. So low-skilled are defined workers who are high school graduate or less. And high-skilled are defined workers with more than a high school degree. So I look at this dimension among others. The methodology I use, I try to combine different methodology. I start with a standard OLS Minserian equation to assess the union premium on wages. And then I'll also use a quantile regression. And this is particularly important in this kind of studies where we know and we have learned that union can exert a different pressure depending on which part of the wage distribution are workers located. And then I also apply this Gelbach decomposition, which would allow to identify the contribution of different covariates with respect to the change of the coefficient. But in this case, I'll tell you a little bit more when we get there. And finally, I look at the probit model just to see what determines the unionization of migrants. So just to start with a little bit of descriptive stats. As we know, this chart shows something which is well known, which is the deunionization of workers in the United States. So from 1994 to 2019, in addition, something which I'm not sure is pretty well known, it also shows that natives tend to be more unionized than migrants. So although the trends of deunionization affect both in the same way. Just to point out a couple of increases in 1999, and of course after the financial crisis, where there has been a little bit of increase in unionization. And then I look at the same unionization by looking separately between low skill and high skill workers. And these figures, again, confirms something that we know from the literature, which is there is a positive selection into unionization, into unions from low skill workers, and there is a negative selection into union for high skilled workers. So the charts on the left, I think shows there are a couple of interesting aspects. Again, one that we know there has been deunionization, and this has affected both low skill, high skill migrants and natives. The deunionization has been faster, and the level of unionization has decreased more for low skilled native workers, while it's been, still has decreased, but a little bit less for high skill workers. And the other important aspect that we can see is that the gap in the unionization is much larger for low skilled workers than it is for high skilled workers, again, between natives and migrants. So despite this deunionization, again, this gap still, remains. And then, of course, there are a lot of different variation and dimensions that we can look. So this chart is based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics from the US and shows the density of unionization by states in 1995 and 2019. And again, the main message is that there is a lot of variation, along with the fact that there has been a decrease. But I think next slide, which is the follow, focuses on the 2019 only. And so again, shows a lot of variation within states, and essentially shows that Hawaii, New York, Washington, Rhode Island, Alaska, New Jersey are the states where at least 15% of workers or more are unionized. And these are based on the whole labor force, men and women together. Again, this adds a little bit, I haven't, just to anticipate, I haven't exploited much the dimension by states, but perhaps might be worth doing it later on. And again, similarly...
Sorry, Cinzia, could I just ask a couple of clarification questions? One is, how is immigrant defined? So these are first generation immigrant who have been present in the country since 1994, or are they, is this a floor, or what's the definition?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's obvious, but I didn't spell it out. It's just defined in the based on where you were born. So migrants, if you were born outside the US, then you are defined as migrants. So,
and they have been present. So in your study for 25 years, new immigrants can enter, but
of course.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's right. I mean, again, there are different aspects because the CPS data also contains information on the second generation, but I mean, I just want to consider just, the new migrants as they arrive, just a very basic, kind of stuff.
And how does the unionization work? Is it different sectors have different unions?
So, I mean, I'm not quite sure about this, how to answer this. So again, in the data, there is the question that it asks to everyone, if you are unionized or not. And if you are, instead, you might not be unionized, but in your sector, you are covered by a unionization organization. But as I said, in the vast majority, 90%, you know, in every year, about 90% of workers are essentially union member.
Okay,
in
thank
this
you.
case. Yes, thanks. Again, there is a lot of variation of immigration by states, but again, I'll skip this. It gets a bit, you know, it takes into other aspects. So just a graph on the wages of comparison natives and immigrants, something again we know. There is a gap. Natives tend to earn more than migrants. This is true over time, although there has been this gap has been decreasing, particularly maybe from 2014. But the main idea is that natives tend to earn more than migrants, and this is, you know, something which is a stylized fact, well established. And then I'll look into low skilled and high skill. So, and there are two, I think, a couple of interesting things. So one is for low skilled workers, comparing natives to immigrants, we see that essentially it is still true the wages of low-skilled workers, natives, are higher than those, you know, immigrants' counterpart. There has been, again, a little bit of decrease since 2014, but still remains. When we look at high-skilled migrants, the gap is much smaller, but interestingly, particularly from 2011, the wage of migrants overtake wages of natives. So high-skilled workers, on average, migrants seems to earn more than high-skilled workers, natives. And again, this is something which is also true in the UK. And so just to separate then different, to have an idea of wages by union and by non-union for migrants and natives. So when we separate between union and non-union, what we can see is that natives who are unionized earn on average more than any other groups, while migrants who are not unionized represent the group that, you know, is earning less. So even natives who are non-union still earn more than even migrants who are unionized. So even when we look at this dimension, again, this is all the workers altogether, on average, natives unionized or non-unionized earn more than migrants. And these, again, pretty much kind of remains when we look at low-skilled workers. Natives unionized earn more, migrants non-unionized earn less, and immigrants unionized are now closer to the wage of natives non-unionized. And when we look at the high-skilled workers, there is no very clear trend. Things are very more similar, except that high-skilled workers, immigrants who are not unionized, have a lower wage. So let me move then into you know, a bit of regression analysis. So as I said, what I'll do, I'll start with the standard Mintzerian equation to estimate the union premium and to highlight variation of this membership premium over time and across different dimensions. I do this separately by year. I run separately by immigration status, so immigrants and natives separately, and also by low skill and high skill migrants and natives. So the dependent variable is the log hourly wage, and the controls are the standard controls, age squared, dummies for the level of education, a dummy for manager to capture occupation, because occupation is, you know, is not the same, defined is not the same over time, ethnicity, state fixed effect, industry, and also Yes, I think pretty much that's it. And then, of course, in the regression for migrants, I also add migrant-related variables, such as the case of arrival, a country of birth for migrants. And so, again, what I'll show you now, and also for the remaining part of the presentation, is mainly the coefficient of the union. I'm not showing you the coefficient or the other variables. I'm really focusing on the union and the union membership premium. In this table, only report 6 points in time, because as I said, I run this regression year by year, separately by natives and immigrants. And so essentially what we can see is that especially in the initial part of the timer I'm considering, the union premium for natives seems to be slightly higher than that for migrants. Although this then, there is a kind of convergence in the later year, which is in 2019. So that seems to suggest that maybe the union pressure on wages might be a bit different between native and migrants. And this figure plots the coefficient of union for high-skilled workers with the confidence interval, but just to say, as we would expect, the union premium, the coefficients is every year is statistically significant. So in general, what we observe if we look at high scale is that the union premium of natives is slightly higher than union premium for immigrants, except a couple of years like 1998, 2012, where the union premium of migrants is slightly higher. So again, this show that there is some variation in the union premium and in the way a union exert their power towards these two main groups. When we look at low skill, I think there is a little bit less variation. So there are, the trends seems to be a little bit more similar. So which seems to suggest that the differences are mainly when we consider high-skilled workers. And then just to summarize, so this is just a summary of the union premium. When we look at all workers in 1994, comparing the first and last year, we can see that the union for all natives, if we consider all natives, all the workers all together, is slightly higher. And the average over 25 years is the union premium is 15% compared to 13%. But when we look at low-skilled workers, essentially the premium seems to be the same, 18% on average. And more variation, more differences occur when we consider native and migrants. So over the 25 years, the premium, the union premium for natives has been slightly higher for migrants. Now, of course, these are two still heterogeneous groups because, we define by high scale, low scale, but we know that there is a lot of mismatch going on in the labor market. So people who have high level of education might be doing a different type of job that what they should do. So because of this, what I do, I look at the actual quantile regression. And this is something that has been used in the past by O'Leary and others for the UK, Fitzenberg for Germany. And so what I'll do, I also take into account, I separate into two main time period before and during the recession. So I use a quantile regression on pooled years from 1994 to 2008, and then from 2009 and 2019.
Sorry, Cinzia, there was a question. I think Eva wants to.
Sure, sorry. Yeah, please do go ahead.
No, I wanted to ask why, maybe I missed it before you get to the quantile regressions. Why don't you just pool the sample and do an interaction term on the immigrant versus native so that you can directly test whether the premium is different?
No, this is a good question. Absolutely. I mean, for the moment, I just I just wanted to have a general idea of how the premium changes over time. I'll do something, but definitely this is something to definitely, you know, to do.
Yeah, because I think you're always going to run into people not liking to compare coefficients from two different regressions, right? Like you just, I don't think you'll be able to get away with that. And the simplest solution is to just run it in a pooled sample with an interaction.
Yeah.
So that you see, and you can directly test the difference.
That's good. Yes, absolutely. No, that's a good suggestion. Thank you very much. Very useful indeed. Simplifies things, as you said, Eva. And then into the quantile regression, what I do, I separate these 2 years, and I'll focus on the 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentile. And so again, what do we observe? A couple of things that we know already, which is migrants tend to exert more power, if you like, on those who are low skilled. And so we can see this from the coefficient on the 25th percentile. And when we move up on the wage distribution, the effect of unions, you know, decreases, as we would expect. So this is the case for, you know, this trend is the case for immigrants and natives. If we just consider the first time, I consider 1994, 2008, is the case. But again, natives, the premium from natives tends to be higher than that of migrants. And this is particularly the case for those located below, just below the 5th percentile. And these trends continues also when we consider the second part of the time period, which is, you know, immediately after the financial crisis. Considering then the 90th percentile in the first time period, I consider the premium migrants who are located in the 90 part of the wage distribution is slightly higher, and this is, you know, is mirrored later on in the second time period. But again, the main idea is when we look at different, you know, workers located a different part of the wage distribution, then we can see that there is a slight difference between, you know, the union premiums between natives and migrants. And then later on, what I do, I would try to want to see again, go back to the immigrant native wage gap and try to understand how different coefficients, including unionization as well as human capital, occupation, industry, how much they can explain this immigrants wage gap, immigrants native wage gap. So to do that, I use this Gelbach decomposition that has been used before in this setting, immigrant natives has been used, but they're also used in the setting of unions, but not, you know, in these two dimensions combined, if you like. So the main advantage of this Gelbach decomposition is that allows to decompose the contribution of each variables to the change of, in this particular instance, would be estimated immigrant wage gap. And in this case, the methodology is independent of any sequential introduction of a set of covariates. So it's particularly informative in a way. So what I'll do, the way the Gelbach decomposition works, I first run, again, pool the regression between these two time periods and with a dummy for immigrants, just to quantify the immigrants natives wage gap. I also add, you know, the union, and as well as the standard Mintzerian variables. Again, I'm not reporting all the coefficients here because I just want to focus to a couple of variables. And then what I'll do, I'll decompose this. And so what is this telling us? So these show the covariance, the contribution of each variable to the change of the coefficient for immigrants, foreign born. So what we can see is that the union still has an effect. It is not very very large. I mean, we're talking about log hourly wage, so it's about 0.7 percentage points in before the recession, and decreases to 0.4 percentage points later on. And what seems to also, again, not surprisingly, to explain this wage gap between natives and immigrants is, of course, the largest aspects are related to age and education, and of course, as pointed out in the existing literature by decades cohort of arrival. Industry of occupation still also have a role, but is minor, and state of residence doesn't seem to have much of an importance in this decomposition. Again, things are similar, except that the role and the coefficient are smaller after in the financial crisis. And then I separate this again between low-skilled workers and high-skilled workers. And if you look at column 1 and 2, for example, in column 1, in this case, the role of union in explaining the change in the coefficient of, the wage gap between natives and migrants is a bit larger. As we said, when we put together all the workers, it kind of masks a lot of heterogeneity existing within different groups. So the role of union is higher, although age of education, the case of arrivals, and first of all, and then also industry and occupation still contribute to this difference. Things are similar in the second part, in the regression, in the recession, except that the role is smaller. When we look at high skill, instead, the role of union becomes much minor. So the contribution is very little to the change, to the difference, to the gap between immigrants and natives. Although, again, the case of arrival, age and education are still represent an important part. So, as I anticipated, as I was saying at the beginning, of course, this relationship between a union and immigrants also depends on the possibility and the interaction, the decision of migrants to become unionized or not. So one question that I've been looking at is whether this union membership of legal migrants could be, this decision could be due to the fact that migrants, legal migrants, are somehow competing with undocumented migrants. So what I'll do, combining the data from the Pew Center research data that contains information on undocumented migrants by states, I combine this, and then I just run a very basic probit model where the dependent variable is whether a migrant, I just focus on migrants in this case, is unionized or not. The Pew Center research data do not have, at least I couldn't find most recent data. So the last one I could find was, I think, 2016, which, I just looked at a few days ago. So this regression in use as a dependent variable, migrants in 2015 and 2016. And then I take into account the percentage of undocumented migrants in the States 2 years before. So to consider whether migrants are unionized or not, considering the pre-existing concentration of undocumented migrants. And so just to show this is just a correlation between the union share of migrants and the share of notarized immigrant workers. So there is a little bit of trend downward sloping. So for example, in North Carolina, the share of unauthorized immigrant work is quite high, where the union share is indeed very low. So there seems to be a little bit of, correlation between this unionization of migrants and unauthorized migrants. And then what I do, I run a very basic regression analysis. Again, just showing you the main, variables of interest. And so what it shows is that migrants living in states where the share of unauthorized population is larger, tend to be less unionized. And this seems to be statistically significant. And of course, there is, for those who are familiar with the CPS data and, you know, in the US, there has been a way that has been elaborated that you can indeed identify the legal migrants. So just considering those who have a low level of education, who've been there for 5 years or less and do not have a US citizenship. So those are considered to be essentially illegal. So I'll restrict again this probit on the excluding those who are potentially illegal, and the effect doesn't change much. Still shows that those workers, immigrant workers who live in states with a higher concentration of unauthorized migrants seems to tend to be less unionized. So of course, a lot of limitation. There is a selection into unions that has been long debated, and you know, all the studies have been dealing with this. A key challenge is to separate any causal effect of union membership, because there is no random selection into unions. Maybe use of panel data have been helped, but even that has been questioned. Although again, so this to say that of course there is this issue in the data and the result I'm presenting, because you know I couldn't address causality, hopefully for the moment. However, CARD, using the same data, examines workers as they switch between union and non-union sector, and essentially show that even accounting for that, the result, you know, do no change much. So again, the coefficient is likely to be biased, but we shouldn't expect any kind of change of direction. That's, I know, I would expect a change of direction. Of course, I need an IV. So just to conclude, what I do in this paper is to provide a new comprehensive estimates of wage assimilation of migrants, considering the role of unions that has been, you know, widely considered, but not in the setting of immigration. And so there are several findings, some that are already established. We know that unionization rate difference within migrants and natives, and also within different groups. There is variation in union premiums across different groups and over time. And using the Gelbach decomposition on immigrants' native wage gap. So the union appears to be more important source of this wage gap for low-skilled workers, although, as we saw earlier on, other covariates such as age, education, and the case of arrival still remain more important. And also immigrants living in states where there are more unauthorized migrants tends to be less unionized. I mean, I haven't got anything to prove that, you know, the channels, but the hypothesis that most migrants might compete with unauthorized immigrants, and they, instead of using a more formal organization through unionization, which is of course costly, they might organize informally to respond to the threat of increasing illegal supply and increasing competition. And as I said, the priority here is to, again, apart from simplifying the analysis, as Eva is suggesting, to find an IV for endogeneity of unions, but also it would be, I think I would like to exploit the union density by states, but also by industry, which is also available. I think I'll stop here. So thank you very much. And please, if you have questions.
I have a question for you. Okay, I mean, I have a couple of questions. Is it okay to ask questions now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, okay, good. So when I'm looking at your, you define like skill as high school or less, and then high school or above as high skill, right? Yeah. I mean, I have a little bit of an issue with it, because I'd like to see what kind of a robust checks you did, because at least I would have expected some I mean, what I'm saying is, if you say something like some college and above as more like a skill. And then, I mean, just to make sure, maybe your results won't change, but it gives me a little bit more to kind of digest. The other thing is when I'm looking at the control variables you had, I mean, one of the things I would definitely look into it, given the fact that you're using CPS, there is information about the firm size. I don't know whether you included the firm size at all as a control. What happens is, because that, no matter what you include as far as the industry, whatever other fixed effects, whatever is concerned, I mean, I would worry about whether there is any firm size effects which are being picked up by the union coefficients. Because the reason is why I'm mentioning about this is usually we have this union threat effects argument. Basically, what happens is larger firms don't want unions to get into their shops, so they try very, very hard to keep unions out of the picture. The one way they can do it is either by increasing their benefits, or I mean, whatever other things come into the play. So I would highly recommend you to look into whether you can have any control on that particular front.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the first question, high skilled and low skilled. No, I just defined this based on the level of education, which, as you said, is not perfect, but for many obvious reasons. So, I mean, the only kind of check I've done is to look through the quantile regression, those located in different parts of the distribution. But then, as you said, maybe looking at occupation and, it would be relevant, especially when we talk about migrants and natives. And the other one, absolutely, you are right. I don't think I have a firm size, because I have thought, in this data, in the outgoing rotation group, but you are 100% right, because again, the most recent research, some of which have shown, the one from Portugal, they do show that the firm, as you were saying, play an important role. So definitely, this is something to consider. But again, I think on the other hand, to do this, you really would, ideally, you would need employer, data, and which is, as I said, this was this paper of Addison, Portugal, and others. They used the data for Portugal, but yes, but definitely that's something.
Yeah. So, but you already have a paper written, or it's being written?
Well. I have started, because I had a different version of this, because in the past I was focusing more on Hispanics and whites. So I have a paper on that actually, but because my initial intention was to really compare migrants and natives, because as I said, there is not much about this, and the dynamics can be quite different.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Nice.
So I have two things. I wanted to make a quick comment just to, when you said you identify immigrants by place of birth, I believe in the CPS, they also recognize, like, if I have a baby while I'm on vacation, its place of birth is also going to be identified as the foreign country, but they're actually US citizens. So I would make sure that you, because they're not really immigrants, right? So that you take those guys out. But my bigger question was on the states with high fraction of illegal immigrants. To me, that's a mechanical relationship, because the unauthorized immigrants will not have access to jobs that are more likely to unionize, because that's your electricians, right? You need a certification that's not accessible to illegal immigrants. So I feel like if you have a higher concentration of unauthorized immigrants in a state who cannot have jobs that unionize, it's mechanically going to decrease the percentage of immigrants that are unionized. So I feel like that's just a simply mechanical relationship based on access to unions.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, okay, I'm still thinking, yes, right. Yeah. On your first question, definitely, definition of migrants. Yes, it is true that, if you are a baby on where you're, on vacation or whatever. But I think I mean, I can check this, but this would be a very small percentage.
It is, but I mean, it's
I
not.
can still,
But they identify them, so it's easy to take them out.
Yes, indeed. And then also, in the CPS also there is information on if you are naturalized, migrants or just foreign born, whatever. So, but
That's
again,
the
just
variable that will identify if you were born abroad to American parents.
yeah. And your second point, mechanical relationship. Well, I have to think more about it, but yes, I mean, you're probably right. But I mean, the idea is that there are some, if you think about very low skilled workers, migrants, and think about I don't know, working in grocery or things like that, where also unauthorized migrants can have access, right? And so there are different things. So one thing would be is costly, because if you are a union, you have to pay some fees and it would cost more probably. But then, as I said, it could be that in these settings where the cities or the states, the percentage of unauthorized migrants are more, there is more a threat. And so that legal migrants could be somehow substitute in this setting. They wouldn't be substitute in public.
Maybe you can look at the percentage unionized among legal migrants. So you could exploit that variable that identifies whether the immigrant is naturalized or a non-citizen, and maybe look at the percentage of the naturalized citizens who unionize. I think that might get closer to your threat story then.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, as I said, I need to think a bit more about it. It's not straightforward. Thank you very much indeed.
Ira?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you about the coverage of the CPS of the agricultural sector, particularly the migrant agricultural sector. And by migrant, I mean both native and immigrant parts of it. Because I mean, I'm not sure. And it seems to me that this sector traditionally traditionally been the last 40 years, has had a very strong union, but then again, you have a lot of undocumented workers. Yeah, so I don't know how those proportions work out, or whether that's even included in the estimations, in the data set.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, I mean, well, there is information, on agriculture, and so I haven't looked into details into, in the sectoral aspects and the distribution of natives, migrants, and also, again, this Pew Research Center data also have information on the in different states on the concentration of undocumented workers. If you are undocumented workers is working in manufacturing or agriculture, so probably this is something I could look and exploit a little bit more, maybe.
Good. Yanis?
Hi everyone, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. If you want to keep your formulation using separate estimations for separate groups, you might want to use test you might want to test whether the estimators you get are statistically different or not, using a simple t-statistic. Although I would rather use a dummy variable and pull all the groups together. I was wondering whether you have information on where the skills were obtained. If I understood correctly, you only use first generation immigrants, but do you have information on where they get where they had their I don't know, their degree or their diploma from high school? Because in Greece, for example, if your degree, even if you do have a tertiary education degree, if it's not from Greece, it is very difficult to be appreciated by the labor market and be rewarded in the labor market. That's one thing. And the other, have you had any look on overeducation, on whether immigrants are actually being employed based on their skills, or whether they are employed in jobs that require less skills than the ones they embody? Have you checked that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for your comments. So first of all, yes, indeed, I should think, as you've already suggested earlier on, simplify presentation using just dummies to show the statistical significance between the groups. On the level of education, so in the CPS data, I do not know where where the immigrants got the level of education. I mean, I could potentially kind of derive the variable, because I know that the case of arrival, and if you know how many years it takes to have a degree, so when pretty much you finish. So as an approximation, and this has been done in the literature before, so I can potentially could do that. But then, it goes back to the other question, which is about overeducation. I have not looked at it, but I do think it's, it can be quite relevant because, as you said, it is pretty well known and pretty common that, migrants tend to do jobs that actually do not match their level of education, especially when they first arrive in the country. So then I'm thinking, again, this would be going back to what I'm trying to show, the union premium and how this, varies over time. Then I need to think how I could incorporate this, in the whole analysis. It would definitely add an additional dimension and is relevant. So that's something, it could definitely I could look into. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Going once, going twice. Okay, that's great. Thanks so much, Cinzia, for the interesting presentation, and thank you everyone for participating and asking questions and making suggestions. Hopefully, you'll have a bit more information now before Tuesday for your seminar in Germany. So,
Indeed.
That's good. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll see you all next month, or whoever attends next month. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers. Thank you.